Welcome to Mocktails and Masterpieces with the Indianapolis Chamber Orchestra, sponsored by Anthony Shefferly and Associates. Hello and welcome to this special episode of Mocktails and Masterpieces. I'm Dana Stone, the Executive Director of the Indianapolis Chamber Orchestra, and I'm here with our maestro as part of this new series that we are like sub-series within Mocktails, where we talk about score to stage, the process of creating and presenting a concert. So Maestro, please, I'll let you go ahead and get started. ICO, of course, has a long history of commission works, working with composers and choosing repertoire. Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe how we come to find composers? I know there's a couple different ways that help you select who we might work with in the future. And then a little bit about that process. And then from there, we can kind of round out how you program the concert to begin with.
Of course. I love this discussion because new music has been, as you noted, such an important part of the ICO's history. And of course, so many of us get into music because of our love for Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, etc. But the fact that we're playing an active role in keeping classical music alive with today's composers, I think is very, very important. One of the ways that ICO has been connected with new music was from its long-standing history with the Contemporary Music Festival at Indiana State University. And over the course of many seasons, we worked with some of our leading composers in the country. So to your question about how we are connected with composers, sometimes the composers are introduced to us. Oftentimes I'll have a personal relationship with a composer, or by word of mouth, either our musicians will recommend some composers, or my colleagues in the industry will recommend composers. But it is a very small network of musicians, obviously. It's the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. It's more like 1 or 2 in classical music. We all seem to know each other. So I think it's a fascinating process to begin a conversation with a composer, to gauge their interest in working with us and creating a work for our unique ensemble, and then watching how that evolves, from a simple conversation over the course of a season into crafting a work that we'll end up presenting. So I think we've done some marvelous premieres as either a direct commissioner or part of a consortium. I'm thinking of the Tessa Lark consortium with Michael Torkey and the Bluegrass Concerto that he wrote, or James Aikman, who was our longtime composer in residence, his Peacemakers, among other works. In the upcoming premieres that we have, 2 major premieres this season, being actively involved in creating new music is critical. And then to go one step further, to take that piece and to try to keep it in the repertoire. Everybody's excited about a world premiere, but getting the second performance of a work or the third performance of a work is something that really helps that piece stay in the repertoire. And our good friend Ronaldo Moya, who's written a few pieces for us, have taken his works to other orchestras and played them there. So it really is not over at the premiere. That's just the beginning of the process. But it's great because you get to actually communicate with the composer. As we always say, you can't go back and talk to Beethoven or Brahms, but when you're working with living composers, there's a lot of dialogue that goes back and forth.
So when, I know some of this from the administrative side, but when we're presenting a new work, how much of the conversation happens during the composition process? Does it vary from composer to composer? Maybe you can speak to that a little bit. And then us being a chamber orchestra, our instrumentation is a little bit different than maybe what most mainstream compositions are being written. So maybe you can touch on that too.
Sure, of course, as you stated, it does vary considerably from composer to composer. I've worked with so many composers like, great, I've got an idea. And then they come back with the finished score a couple months later. No conversation, no input whatsoever. And we have very, very collaborative composers like Ronaldo that I mentioned, Stacy Gearup, who's worked with us several times, another very collaborative composer, always coming back with questions. What if we tried this? Is this possible? We talk about themes, thematic programming as well. Some composers are very interested in having conversations about that. So they all work at their different pace and different styles. Some are longer than others, and getting pen to paper, or now everything is done on computers. But some work incredibly fast. Michael Shapiro, who is our composer in residence for the 25-26 season, had 2 completed works already. So we didn't actually commission him, but those works had never been performed. His violin concerto and a work he's entitled Zoomies about his two very energetic dogs. Those are works that were ready to be performed, and I'm thrilled that he selected us, to record these and premiere these works for the first time. So it very uh, let's say, regarding the instrumentation or orchestra, we all talk about how a chamber orchestra is the orchestra of Mozart and Haydn. Double winds, horns, two trumpets. We do have one trombone and timpani, but we are very versatile and malleable about how we can put musicians on stage depending on what we need. And so Stacy, now that she's working on a work entitled Chroma for a premiere, wanted not just the pair of horns, she wanted four horns. And of course, that changes the balance within the orchestra, to add an extra trombone in there as well. So when we have a complement of some, 22 strings, the more brass and woodwinds that you add can affect the balance. So it's quite common for us to add a few extra strings to make up for that if we need to. But we are very versatile in how we can present the instruments on the stage. I love the chamber orchestra repertoire because it's so intimate. And it is, every musician, as we say, is a soloist. There's no place to hide in the orchestra, but the colors are really what make it, I think, so fascinating. To add a piano, to add some extra mallet percussion, all of those colors, come together in any fashion that the composer chooses. So they really have a complete artistic license. I don't put any parameters other than the costs. We're very much in dialogue about what things are going to cost for rehearsal and for instruments, but other than that, I think it's most important that a composer writes what they feel, and they're not being dictated to. So every collaboration that I can think of has been a positive for us. Some pieces have been more successful than others, but I can't think of one example where we've worked with a composer and it wasn't a fulfilling experience in some way or another.
It's really exciting. And I know that we have even more commissions on the horizon with a consortium with New Music America. And well, believe it or not, 27, 28 will be our presentation of that piece. But it's exciting to be a part of the initiative to kind of lift up new voices and to expand the repertoire for chamber orchestra. We'll talk a little bit now about balancing repertoire when we have new commissions or when we have a soloist. How do you shape a program? Does it typically come from a theme? Does it come from maybe a cornerstone piece, or a little bit of both?
I'd say a little bit of both, and not to be intentionally vague about this. We have 7 subscription concerts during the course of the season. That's considerably different than here in Louisiana, where we have 13 subscription concerts on top of a 32-week season. So I have to be very focused on how all of the parts in our ICO season come together to create something that is hopefully very balanced and not too lopsided in one direction or another. There have been seasons I can't believe it's been coming up on 11 seasons now. There have been certain seasons that have leaned more into new music or to unfamiliar repertoire by well-known composers. But last season was a focus on the 4 great Viennese classics composers. So we had works by Schubert, Mozart, Beethoven, and Haydn. In addition to some of the new works that we programmed, there have been seasons where I've really leaned into thematic programming, that every concert had some kind of theme, one way or the other, where it was a war theme or music and poetry, Shakespeare, et cetera, et cetera. So every year it's a little bit different. I try to make sure that we're constantly moving in different directions so that we don't ever feel like one season is identical to the one before it. And that might be as simple as moving, the traditional elements of our season around, like we are this year, opening with our silent movie as opposed to its traditional place in March. But the long and the short of it is, I try to make sure that every period of music is represented somehow or another, and we can go all the way back to the Baroque, probably even further if we wanted to new commissions here. So it's not just an artistic initiative. If it were, we'd be doing a lot of really abstract music, but I have to make sure that I make your job a little easier because you have to sell these concerts. And if it's all Schoenberg and second Viennese composers, then that gets a little hard to do, even though I love that music. So it's the balance. Most importantly, I take a look at what composers we haven't performed in a long time, what works we haven't performed in a long time. and I make sure that those pieces find a place on programming. But ultimately, I'm sitting on probably a dozen programs that I've been trying to fit in to the ICO schedule for a while, and for one reason or another, they just haven't. So there's always great music to perform, and so I'm thankful we don't have a shortage of it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I appreciate that you pay attention to instrumentation. And if we're going to hire four horns, we have them playing on a couple pieces and not just one.
That's
Um,
right.
and
You would be,
that's a small thing that people maybe don't notice, but that's an element of choosing the repertoire as well, is who have we hired and how many folks are going to be there. Do we have a bass trombone or a tuba?
That's a very good point there, because so often when we're performing, it seems like an interchangeable part, that some people will leave the stage and others will come on, but there's a whole financial picture behind that about how you budget for concerts, who are you hiring for this movie. For example, the Carl Davis score for the 1925 Ben-Hur is not a chamber orchestra score. It's a full symphonic orchestra. Now, we're able to make that work by adding just a few extra strings, but all of these things have obviously an impact on our budgeting and planning. So absolutely, if I'm planning for a specific piece that requires an extra 8 or 10 musicians, that I try to find repertoire that'll help utilize those musicians, so they're not just playing on a handful of programs. And it's surprising to me, my conductor colleagues who also conduct chamber orchestras, how many large scale works they actually program, which aren't really chamber orchestra pieces. I mean, the Beethoven symphonies are terrific, but I would only program about 4 of them for chamber orchestra. Beethoven 9 really is not a chamber orchestra piece. 4 horns, again, the trombones in the last one with the full chorus. It's very hard to satisfactorily perform that work with 6 first violins. So always keeping in mind the personnel that we have on stage, and that's a very important component in the decision-making process for repertoire.
And finally, let's talk about rehearsal prep from your perspective. I think many of us have played an instrument, know what it's like to get music and work independently before you come together as a group. But you're kind of the lone wolf out there, preparing without an instrument and preparing for every instrument. So maybe you can share a little bit about how you approach both new music and existing repertoire.
So once the program is determined and we know how many rehearsals that we have, I have to put together a rehearsal order, as you were saying. Again, trying to utilize the right number of musicians on any service, which is usually 2.5 hours, so that people either aren't sitting around, for 2 hours waiting for their turn to play, or that they're only coming in to play a handful of notes, or et cetera, et cetera. So that it's important to have a rehearsal structure together, so you're maximizing the time. We never have enough rehearsal. We would ideally love to have, I remember when there used to be 5 rehearsals for a symphonic block, and then down to now 4, but the ICO for many years only did concerts on 3 rehearsals, which you have to be extremely efficient and thorough with how you put things together. But it's very easy to put together a rehearsal order for the music that because the difficulty, those passages that need extra time, that need to be gone over slowly. It's exceptionally difficult for new music, because in many cases I have to put a rehearsal order together before the piece is ever written. So I don't know if this music is going to be hard, if it's going to require more rehearsal than necessary. So I'll often have to kind of go back and adjust rehearsal orders in order to, once I have the score and I go through it. For me personally, the whole process has to start months, if not even a year, ahead of the concert. Many of these pieces now, since I've been at this for a long time, I'm going through for the 4th or 5th or maybe even the 10th time. But with new music, it's the first time for everybody, obviously, and there's no performance history to kind of lean back into, like Beethoven performance practices or Mozart. So there's not a kind of a history with that. It's a brand new piece. But honestly, the preparation is exactly the same as I would study any score. I go through it macro to micro. I take a look at the big architecture, then I kind of whittle it down into sections and just kind of tear into the nuts and the bolts of it. So that takes time, preparation, but the more prepared I am, I feel like the musicians have a better opportunity to really dig into the piece, and then the rehearsals are much smoother that way. So all of this stuff, happens months in advance before we even play a note, which I think is often surprising to people, if they don't have a classical background, or if they come to observe the rehearsal, to see how everything kind of comes together. So it's due to a lot of thought and preparation.
And absolutely, you're definitely right. We certainly invite some of our principal players, our performance underwriters, to rehearsals, and sometimes they'll be at the very first rehearsal for a concert cycle, and they're like, "So this is the first time you've come together?"
Hmm.
Yeah, it is, and I think that demonstrates the preparation that happens on both sides of the stage, both you and the musicians, that we're able to come together, and it basically sounds, I don't want to say ready, but
Hmm.
it's there. I think people are surprised that it's not like a regular cadence, like a high school band of 3 times a week. It's very different from that. There's a lot of independent work, so that when you come together, it's a very cohesive and efficient process.
And that's one of the most edifying aspects of my job, honestly, is to work with such incredibly talented colleagues that you're right. You get into the first rehearsal, and then in many cases, you can start working on details. You don't have to know, your bar early, or no, that's, you're in the wrong key, et cetera. Like, no, these are consummate professionals who get their music, weeks ahead of time, if not earlier than that, and, come prepared so that we can really start to sculpt something that is, I think, a real interpretation, so to speak. We're trying to realize the score as effectively as possible, but there are a lot of decisions that have to be made. And so many times that I'll hear one of our musicians perform something in a certain way, and it'll change my idea about how I thought about the piece. So I love having our patrons, our supporters in rehearsal so they can see how it all comes together, the things that I stop for, the things that I know I don't need to stop for, the questions that are asked. It is a very collegial experience, I find, with our musicians. They have a lot of investment, and they're very happy to be there performing. They enjoy working with each other. It's a great environment.
I'm curious, you said, when a commission comes, you don't know necessarily what's going to be the difficult part or how difficult the piece is. How often is the piece not as hard as you expected?
Not very often. Usually it's yeah, not usually, not very often. Although, I mean, there are pieces that come together much easier than that. I mean, Ronaldo's music I love, and it's exceptionally difficult, but it's not difficult for the sake of being difficult. It's difficult because, this is the sound world that he's inhabiting, and it has a lot of rhythmic complexity. And then once you dig into it, the music, it does make considerable amount of sense. Same with Miguel de Aguila. We've done many of his works. The meters are very complicated. But once you start to perform it, you see the logic behind it. So some things need to be really kind of taken apart slowly, put back together in different sections. Other times you can play through it and get a general sense of it. But it's what's fascinating. Every composer has their voice. And not every composer's piece, not every one of the works are exceptionally difficult. But if it's unfamiliar, chances are we're going to need spend a little bit more time just equating ourselves with it a little bit better, so that we don't feel like we're out there at the concert playing it for the very first time. You need to let this music sink in a little bit for all of us.
Absolutely. So, any other tips or thoughts on this first stage of kind of presenting music?
I think it's important for all of us to continue to be advocates for composers. It's so difficult to get music performed, especially for orchestra or opera as well. I mean, it's one thing to write a flute sonata, it's one thing to write a piece for solo violin and have somebody go out and play it, but there's a huge financial investment for orchestras to be playing new music. So I'm very thankful to our colleagues in this industry, like New Music USA or the League of American Orchestras, for making opportunities like the Toolman Commission that we received this year to work with Stacy Garrett for a large scale work. These grants are fundamental for us to continue to present these works, and to give these opportunities for many younger composers, but also veteran composers who want their music played, but it's just difficult. So I'm very thankful also, not only to those organizations and our musicians, and for you, of course, for doing all the work to make these opportunities possible. But I'm also very grateful for our patrons who support our mission of presenting new music every season, and attend the concerts and interact with the composers when they're there. So I really feel like we have continued this service for new music with ICO. And I think, again, with only 7 subscription concerts, I think our percentage of new music is much higher than full-time orchestras, many full-time orchestras, just given the amount of new music that we've done over a very long period of time. So I don't think that's going to change at all. We're going to keep inviting a new composer in residence every year to spend time in Indianapolis to write a work for the ICO. And I think continuing to go forward, this will be something that we can really hang our hat on, that we have really championed new music.
Absolutely. And I love that you kind of gave a kudos to our audience that trust us, because I think sometimes when you hear new music, there's a fear factor of, am I going to like this? And I think we've built trust with our audiences that, yes, it's going to be a little edgy, but it's accessible and it's enjoyable. And there's more to it than it just being new. There's substance behind what we present at the ICO. And I'm happy that we get to celebrate that and tell that story to audiences and to our community.
Absolutely. Very well said.
So please buy tickets to the ICO. You can visit icomusic.org to be a part of our entire season. We start October 18th. We have new-ish music in November with the Karen Lefrak Miami Concerto for guitar, as well as new music with Michael Shapiro in January, our commissioned Toolman Grant with Stacey Garup in March, and really something wonderful to discover all year. So we hope you'll join us for future episodes of this mini series Score to Stage within our mocktails and masterpieces. Thanks so much, Matthew.
Thank you.